Whew, you hear that tune and you know what it is. It is season 2 of Unpacking Stories. My name is Mel and it has been too freaking long and I'm so excited. If you're new here, grab yourself a drink, grab yourself a snack, maybe a blanket, and get cozy as we take the journey with these inspiring stories and individuals as they take us through their journey, their path, and some of the pivotal moments in their lives, and some really interesting experiences. I want to thank the storytellers for coming on, pouring their time and energy into telling their stories and opening up about their lives. I want to thank you for clicking on this, for all the love and support I've received from the last season and coming into this season. It's really awesome. So thank you very much. If you do enjoy it, please rate, review, subscribe. Heck, why not share this with a friend? I hope you're all doing well and having an amazing week. This week's storyteller is Aashna. Aashna dives into her journey growing up in India, having the privilege to attend boarding school in Singapore, and going to college in the US. She shares her experience majoring in psychology and theater and tells us about the time she directed a play about psychological torture for her thesis and the color psychology that went behind the production, which was super fascinating. Aashna also shares her journey with grief. We dive into the realities of finding a therapist that you can connect with, as well as tips on searching for a therapist or counselor, because as you'll hear in this episode, it can be quite daunting. She also shares her goals of wanting to become a diversity consultant, which I have no doubt that she'll do because she is just truly a light in this world. I do want to give a bit of a trigger warning that blood and suicide will be discussed in this episode. And I want to thank Aashna for opening up about her health journey as well. Without further ado, here's Aashna. Aashna, thank you so much for being here today.
Happy to be here. Excited.
How are you doing?
I am doing good. My semester starts on Tuesday, so just trying to get everything ready for that.
Congratulations. What year? What are you studying? Let's start with that.
I am in my 5th year in a doctoral program for counseling psychology. So getting closer to just working on my dissertation, and then my final year in the program is like a year-long internship. So I'll be applying to that next fall.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's incredible. And definitely need more people who will be in those spaces. So thank you for doing that and all the work that you do and will be doing. I'm excited to jump into your journey today. So I guess we'll just start at the beginning. What was your childhood like? Who were you growing up?
Yeah, so I actually have very little memory of my childhood, and this is something that really bugs me. Like I talk to my therapist about it. I'm like, why don't I remember? But she tries to tell me it's normal. But I grew up in Mumbai, India. So that's where I lived the first 16 years of my life. Grew up with both my parents married. I have a younger brother. He's 5 years younger than me. What else? I was always very academic, like did my work, got good grades. I lived in a part of Mumbai that was less like in the city. It was a little more out of the city. So we called it a colony, but it was like a bunch of houses. And that's what I would spend most of my free time doing, is like the other kids in my colony. We would just get together and do whatever. I remember there would be times we would ride around on our bikes and collect leaves and then like compare who had the best leaf. And that was like our currency. But we also played a lot of soccer and cricket. What else about my childhood? I never really felt like I fit in. I was friends with a group of like girls, and I'm no longer in touch with them, but I think they were always into like fashion and, you know, talking about boys and like, I guess, typical girl stuff. And I just never really felt like that was my thing, but still was friends with them. But I think it just led to like building resentment in me. And it got to this point, and this is something I'm very not proud of, where I wrote a Facebook note about them and was like really mean to them, and then published it for all of my school to read.
Oh my gosh.
And then I like logged off. It was like, I'm done for the day. And when I showed up to school the next day, everyone was like, oh my gosh, what have you done? Yeah, those are some random memories.
Yeah, no, well, first, I've never been to India. What is it like there?
Yeah, well, there's so many different parts, and like
Mhm.
Mumbai, I would say, is one of the more like Western modernized cities. So what was it like? That's such a hard question to answer too. I guess the standard of living is just very different than the US. And so and like my family, I would say we're upper middle class. Well, what is like one of the biggest differences is back home, I had a driver. So if I needed to
Oh.
go anywhere, like he would drive us places.
Hmm.
So I never learned to drive till I moved here. It's also pretty common to have like domestic help at home that live in with you. And so that's also very different than here. Because I remember when I moved away, I was like, oh, chores. Interesting. And
Right.
I also, this is another silly memory, but I didn't know you're supposed to wash your sheets and towels because, that was just something that happened automatically for me growing up.
Right,
And
yeah.
when I was in college, my friend, I think somebody at some point was like, oh, when's the last time you did your sheets? And I was like, what are you talking about? They're just bed sheets. You don't need to
Yeah.
wash them. She was horrified. Let's see. There's also a lot more, I guess, like street vendors. So that's something that
Mm.
I don't see as much here. But like on my walk home from where the school bus would drop me off to my house, there would always be someone selling corn or like people selling vegetables. Um, what else? I grew up pretty protected. My dad didn't let me do very much. So like I was not really allowed to go hang out with my friends too much. And because he didn't want me to take like a taxi home.
Mm.
So I wouldn't really be allowed to go unless I had the car. But then, my mom worked. And so I didn't really have the car very much. Yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question.
No, it definitely does. I know other places in the world also have similar type of living situations where they have people who help them and stuff. And so, but hey, trust me, there's people here that don't know they should washing the bed are the thing. So you're not alone in that. It
Yeah.
does take time. I will say that because every time you have to take down. Well, like my situation is you have to like go downstairs and I'm in a complex, so it's a whole situation. So trust me.
Yeah.
I understand. And doing it learning to have to do that in college, I'm sure, along with a bunch of other stuff, is just it can be a lot.
Yeah. And I just didn't even like fully understand why, I think, because then I was like, oh, it's because you do get your bed dirty, even if you're just sleeping in it. But now I do my sheets because my partner is very, like, he's all about cleanliness. So he gets very upset if they haven't been
We
done in a
love
while.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. With the situation you had at school where you wrote that Facebook post and published it and then was like, bye. What I guess was sort of met with that when you went to school and did you confront the other females in the group or how did that go?
I did not talk to them. So I had some people who are friends with them who approached me and were like, you need to take the Facebook note down. It's really mean. So the next day I did, because I think by that time I was less angry. And I fully agreed that it was a very mean thing to do. But I think what was in some ways validating is other people were like, thank you. That was so accurate. Because, I look back and I do think that group of friends was in some ways really like snobbish, or
Mhm.
I don't know what the right word is, but it was a clique. And I think that like since I wrote that note, our friendship never really fully recovered. And I think that was good for me, because I think that was good for me to realize, it's okay if you're not friends with these people that you were friends with for so long. And like, you don't have to keep the same friends forever. It's okay to like age out of each other and develop new interests. And then the way school works in India, or at least like the schooling I did, is after 10th grade, you graduate high school and then you can go to college for 2 years. So that would be what your 11th and 12th grade is. And that's called junior college. But my dad wanted, or like found out about this school in Singapore. It's called UWC, United World College, and their whole mission is to get students from all around the world to come study together and live together. And so he asked me if I was interested in like perhaps moving away. And so at this point I was 16 years old. And I was like, yeah, okay. Like I don't really like my friends all that much. So why not?
Yeah.
And I applied and I got in. And so for 11th and 12th grade, I did boarding school in Singapore at this school. It's called UWC.
That's incredible. Wow. Singapore is definitely on my list. So is India. And so like having to hear from someone else's perspective and what they've seen, what they've lived through is kind of really just makes me want to go to these places even more. What was your time in Singapore like?
I think that's when I really started to like develop as a person. And it was a lot of change and a lot of like, okay, there's different ways that people are raised and different like things people are allowed to do, so to speak. You know, like for example, my dad never let me wear red lipstick because he was like, oh, only what you can imagine the words he used.
Yeah.
And then going and meeting people, like so my roommates my first year were from Peru, Norway, and China. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many different people here.
Yeah.
That was also when I got to study subjects that I had never been like that were never offered at my school in Mumbai. So I took psychology and theater, which later developed into being like my majors in college. So that was really fun. I really liked living away from home and just being independent. And it was nice. Singapore was also a really safe city. It's very small. It's got incredible public transportation and incredible food. But I think like similar to school, I was still pretty academically focused. So I did a lot of my schoolwork. That always came first. And then in my free time, it was just spending a lot of time with my friends and like doing whatever we wanted to that particular weekend. But like we would go to the mall a lot, or there was this place called Holland Village that was maybe a 15-minute walk from where we lived, and that had just, you know, little stalls and restaurants and like places you could get beer, although I didn't turn 18 till right at the end, and I was not someone who liked breaking rules. I'm still not. Like I still feel very bad if I have to break a rule. So I didn't do too much of that quite yet.
Did you have this sense of liberation in whatever that means to you when you left, since you could kind of sort of figure stuff out kind of on your own because you're no longer right under, you know, parents' household?
Yes, absolutely. I think for me that was very necessary because my family, I don't know if I would call it controlling, but they like having a watchful eye. And so for me, that was really helpful. If like, okay, I can figure out how I want to time my homework on my own. Because when I lived at home, you know, my dad would come check, what have you gotten done? What are you doing? I remember when I was younger, like I would take my big textbooks and then put like another book in front of it because that's the only way I would be like to read for pleasure.
Yes.
And I didn't have to pretend or do any of that anymore. And I was still doing well. So it wasn't like that was never an issue for me is, okay, I'm like going to get too lost, so to speak. Yeah, and just allowing myself to do what I wanted versus like what my family wanted. And I guess another big thing growing up, and this is characteristic of Indian culture, but perhaps other cultures as well, is the sense of like, what are people going to say? So a lot of actions are driven by how are others going to judge us if you do this. So don't wear this dress because other people will think XYZ versus like, don't wear this dress because I don't like it.
Especially being a young person, feeling like you have to sort of represent your family, if that makes sense. And then I'm only like, you know, I'm only a teenager. Like I don't figure myself out. So I completely understand. And I also had a similar strict upbringing in terms of, I think my first sleepover, I want to say, was either end of high school or in college when I was finally allowed to stay the night. And that was like a big thing because it was like the safety aspect. like who's going to be there to like protect you if something happens. And like when you're in that situation, you're kind of like, well, I mean, everyone else is doing it. You think more of like, my friends are doing it. Why can't I?
Yeah,
And
I know. Yeah.
so I completely understand that. And yeah, like I can understand how leaving that for like one for school gets you to also open up you to wanting to study other subjects. Like, do you think if you didn't take this opportunity to go to Singapore and you would have stayed in India, would you have ever decided to study, counseling therapy and theater?
Absolutely not. There's no way. Because also the way junior college works is it's like you can go to commerce, which is economics type of stuff, but it's targeted. There isn't as much openness in like what you're gonna study. And then I believe for like stuff like theater, you can just do arts. But yeah, I didn't really know of any junior colleges that like appealed to me. And my dad also, like, it took him a long time to be open to me studying these things because he, when I first started doing psychology based stuff, he was like, okay, like, why don't you do industrial organizational psychology? Because
What's that?
That's basically like psychology for businesses. So I would work for somewhere like, I don't know, Google or whatever, and help them figure out like, this is how you can make your employees better, productive humans.
Okay, yeah.
So my dad still took a while to like adjust because for him, successful careers were more based around the, normative things like economics or
Engineering.
exactly. And that was just never my thing. But I'm also a very stubborn person. So I just didn't give up. And I was like, well, this is what I'm doing. So you're just going to get used to it.
Yeah. That's kind of, in a way, like that liberation, right? To be able to say, watch me, like, sort of hit the goals that I'm saying, and like everything will be okay. So you're in Singapore. What happens towards the end of that? So you were there for 2 years, and
Yep.
then what happens?
So my dad always had told us like you're going to go to college in the US. He did his undergrad and graduate work here in the US, and he really liked the education system here and found it far superior to what's offered in India. And we always had the financial means that I knew that would be possible. And I say that because I think it's important to acknowledge privilege and not just make it sound
100%.
like anyone can do this.
Mm-hmm.
So I was applying to college and I wanted something very different than I had ever experienced. So I'd lived in Mumbai and Singapore, which were two big cities. So I was like, okay, I'm going to look for something really rural where there's like really nothing around so I can focus on relationships because that was my favorite thing about Singapore was the community and being able to like live with all my friends. And so I wanted that to like happen again. So I tried to look for colleges that had like a high percentage of students who lived on campus. And where I went, Middlebury was about, I think 95-ish% live on campus. It was also very rural. And then I looked for liberal arts colleges because I loved in Singapore being able to take, different subjects and not feel like I'm locked into one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So liberal arts colleges like Middlebury, I had to take 32 courses total, but only like 11 had to be your major. So that gives you so much room to do whatever else you want to do.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to experience 4 seasons. I still wonder why I thought that would be fun.
Because of the TV shows make it
I
look
know.
like you're just going to walk out in snow and heels and look like fabulous.
And it's so fine, you'll be warm, no worries. It's a lie. It's so cold. But I thought that's what I wanted. So I was looking primarily in the Northeast. And my dad and I had done like a road trip. And I actually didn't even do a tour at Middlebury or anything. We just drove around. But I really liked campus. And I was like, I think this is it. So I applied early decision and I got in. And so after Singapore, that's what I did. I moved to Middlebury, Vermont.
Now that I would say is probably a huge also culture shock from India to Singapore to Vermont. What was your transition to Vermont like once you settled in and going to Middlebury?
I actually felt like I had an easier transition than a lot of my friends because I had done the like leaving home thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't that homesick, you know, and I wasn't like, oh, what is it like to live on my own and have no rules? Because that had happened for me. And I remember my first year thinking, like, while my friends were all doing, you know, shots on shots and shots, and I was just kind of like, no, like
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel that need to like break the rules because I've been there. I think the transition was more in the vibe of the school. Like it was a
Okay.
very athletic school. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people did a lot of outdoorsy things, and that really was not, still is not quite my vibe. I'm getting more into it now, but
Yeah.
that was a huge change. Um, Even though like Singapore was not in Mumbai, there was still a lot more like diversity in the student body, but Middlebury was a lot more white.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a while to even like understand what that meant. But I know for my first couple of years, like I would just never feel good enough because I was watching my white friends get invited to parties or like
Mm-hmm.
hook up with people or date people or, you know, whatever. And I just
Right.
wasn't experiencing that myself. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time wasn't able to put the race piece together, but was just like, something's wrong with me specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the big transition. And then I guess the third was social class as well. Like I thought, well, back in India, I would say my family's upper middle class, but then compared to like what upper middle class means here,
Yeah.
very different.
Mm-hmm.
And my friends tended to be from wealthier families. So I know some of my stuff was like, I can't pay for things like these people are paying for things, you know, I
Yeah.
can't eat out as much and
Yeah.
I can't just go shopping. And how do I like navigate that? Because none of us were really good at talking about money explicitly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so when you had to move, when you made the decision to move again, did anyone come with you, like your friends, or were you kind of starting over again along with like going to a new school in the United States and all that?
My dad did drop me off, but so Middlebury also has a huge international student population, and
Okay.
that was one of the draws because they actually have a partnership with my high school. Basically, UWC, which was my high school, has campuses across the world. So they have one in the US, and they have like one in Italy, they have one in the UK, and like a bunch of other places. And so all of them, all of the UWCs have a partnership with maybe 90 US colleges where anyone from UWC who goes to one of these 90 colleges can get up to $20,000 in financial aid from the person, from like just this random rich person who went to UWC. So a lot of UWC students end up going to places like Middlebury because because then the school doesn't have to pay that financial aid. So they also like us because they get, you know, to like pay some of our financial aid through a different means.
That's so interesting. In school, I wanted to study abroad, but it just wasn't an opportunity for me, both
Mm-hmm.
financially, amongst like my schooling was also like I actually moved a lot in between schools. So it was hard to try and like for me to try and like, feel not feel comfortable, but like get settled and then know
Mm-hmm.
to have to leave again. That's kind of awesome that you had those opportunities and were able to do that. And so what happened after that? How was your experience actually at Middlebury?
Yeah, I mean, what you said is so real, and that's also why I did not study abroad once I got to Middlebury.
Can you
It's like,
imagine going again to
no. And every time people would ask me, I would be like, I am abroad. Like, this is my study abroad. um, I really loved my time at Middlebury, and I think a lot of that is my friend group. We just kind of met. Well, we all met because we smoked cigarettes at the time, and there weren't a lot of like cigarette smokers, so that's how we became friends. And they stayed my friend group throughout my time there, and
Mhm.
we would hang out pretty much every night. I think when you go to a small college, so it was 2,400 students in total, you just get to really focus on relationships, and there aren't that many distractions, right? So like people aren't going into the city over the weekend or anything. You're just around each other. And then you also have to create a lot of things to do with each other. So whether that's performances, like I was really involved in theater, that took up a lot of my time. But the theater department was like a family. I remember Thanksgiving, if I didn't have anywhere to go, like I would go to my professor's house, and that was really nice.
Yeah.
And I remember when I got into graduate school, my professor took me out for drinks, and that was really sweet of him. Because, he was my theater professor, and I got into school for psychology, but, they were still there for me.
Mm-hmm.
I just like that we were so close to nature, and not that I did all that much with it. It's really beautiful to look at.
I mean, it honestly can change your whole mindset, just waking up and seeing trees and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think is also truly valuable. Were you behind the scenes? Were you on stage? I'd love to hear about that because I love theater and I love going to shows.
Oh,
yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I feel like I saw that. I started out thinking I wanted to act, and then I did it, and I was like, I'm not that good.
What'd you do?
What did I do? I did like a first-year show that was just a collection of small scenes. I don't even remember what it was called. I think it was like 30 Under 30, maybe.
Oh, okay.
And then I acted in this play called, maybe it was called Getting Out, but it was about an individual who got out of prison, and then how she was like coping with the trauma, both of prison, but also like re-entering into society and what that means for her. And then like the relationships pre-prison coming back into her life. And I think that play was really when I was like, I'm not as good as one needs to be to like really excel in theater. And I don't feel bad about that. Not everyone is that great, but I knew I was good at the backstage stuff as well. So I ended up changing my focus to being directing.
Nice.
And I did a lot more of that kind of stuff. But when I declared my major in theater, there were no students of color who were theater majors.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And there was tension between the theater department and students of color. And so like the first couple of years, I tried to really get the theater department to address that and be more explicit about like welcoming students of color, like casting students of color, right? How are you going to have people declare a major if everyone in your play is white? And how are you going to cast students of color if you're like picking playwrights who write for white people and who like write characters for white people? And so I really enjoyed that I got to do some of that work. I think I made some of them angry. I remember one of them had a meeting with me once, and it was like, you need to be more professional and treat us with respect. And I was like, sure, but you can do more too.
Right. And they're professors, like, okay, I guess.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you want me to say about this? Because I'm like sort of bringing up something that a lot of other people feel, but may not feel comfortable saying. And I will say in my time of knowing you, that's something I do appreciate is that you're very forward and that you do speak up on things that are important. So I do appreciate you for that. And I can totally picture you doing that. Like,
I'm very
let's sit down and talk about it.
I get into trouble for my directness a lot, but I think I'm getting better at maybe just like prefacing people with being like, I'm very direct. It's not because I don't like you or because anything else. This is just how I communicate. Yes, that was theater. And then for my thesis, I directed a play about psychological torture.
Did you write it or did someone else write it or was this already written?
It was already written.
Okay.
Yes, it was. I really love it. I still think about it. My take on and what I really liked about the play is you never see any torture, right? All you see is like this one person talking to a mom, dad, and a kid. And the person who's like the interrogator is just like so intense. And I found a perfect actor for it. And that's what I thought was really powerful about the play is all that's unsaid and like how much you could use the costumes of the people who are being interrogated to like hint at torture and what's going on. And I used that as an opportunity to like then create discussion about like how is this showing up in the US government, right? Like how are these tactics being used?
Yeah.
And that was really powerful too.
That's awesome. Speaking of costumes and how you use that to sort of integrate into the show that you were directing and doing your thesis about, did you use a lot of the color psychology to sort of
Yeah.
portray the characters? So the color, I had to do somewhat of that for my schooling, so that's why I know about the color psychology and like how you can sort of wear certain colors to sort of, you don't even have to say it, but it just kind of, those colors direct certain things about characteristics. I'm not really sure how to say it, but yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I was actually helped with a play in Singapore where everything was black and white, except I think there was a rose. So I really loved that idea. And so that's what I used here too, where the set was all shades of gray, black and white, except the whiskey that the interrogator was drinking. And then the blood that we would see on their costumes.
Wow.
So that was the only color. And then those really popped, right? So when they came on, it was like, whoa. And then I wanted the whiskey to be like one of the pieces of color because that's the power, because he never shares it and he keeps pouring more. And, you know, you see that like it's a symbol of his power.
What was the feedback, or how did people react to seeing this? Was it shared widely or was it just for your class?
So the way they do it at Middlebury is you have sort of 3 days where you put on the show and then people can buy tickets. So whoever wanted to buy a ticket could come watch it. And I think people really liked it. I think it was disturbing for people. So that was my intention. I wanted people to leave feeling really uncomfortable. So I achieved that. The one thing I feel bad about is that one of my actors like went to therapy after, because he just like found it hard to get out of his character being tortured. Like he just felt like that sadness was in him. But I think that's a testament to how seriously he took the role. And I'm really grateful he did that, because, you know, his acting really helped people like feel that discomfort because you could see the pain.
Right. And then to go after, and even though he knew it was like for a performance, to then actually take that and say, you know what, this also made me uncomfortable for the fact that I think I will go talk to somebody, you know, and who knows what that even opened up for him and what that healing process is like. But all that to say is that that's like, that shows how powerful you also presented what you wanted to show. And for people, yes, this is uncomfortable. This isn't going to be a rosy show. This is going to be real. And so I would have loved to see it.
I'm sad I don't have a recording because my friend that recorded it lost, or like it didn't have audio, the recording. And so that's just, breaks my heart. But, you know, it makes it a little more special in some ways that we can never get it back. And sometimes I look back and I'm like, wow, I didn't even know what was going to happen, because the thesis was 2016 spring.
Oh, okay.
And then that fall, obviously, is when Donald Trump was elected. And I feel
my gosh,
we've just seen a rise in violence and this like sense of torture, whether it's with immigrants or Black folks. And it's maybe I just knew that was going to happen, but I don't think I could have predicted to the level. I'm mentioning this because I don't know if I did, but I also majored in psychology in college. And we didn't have to do a thesis for that. And I'm so glad I didn't elect to, because that spring was, I think, one of the worst times of my life. I broke up with my boyfriend at that time, who I really thought was my life partner. He's someone I had like met my first year in college and wanted to be with since then. And so there was like years of buildup to when we started dating. So when we broke up, I really thought this was like the end of my life. There could be no happiness again. And at the time, I was having some like GI issues. So I'd been in and out of the doctor. And at maybe 4 days after we broke up, I had gone for a checkup where the doctor was like, okay, like, I'm going to do another scan. I think there's something more going on. And that's when they diagnosed me with an ovarian cyst and said I was going to need surgery. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm supposed to graduate college this semester. I don't have any family here. Like, how am I going to have surgery done? And I remember I had called my ex at that time and been like, hey, can you help me out? Like, I don't think I can manage this on my own. And for his own healing and boundaries, he was like, nope, can't help you. Yeah. So I felt really alone, but I was like, okay, we have to get the surgery done because the cyst was the size of a football, which is wild to think.
Yeah, I'm sorry for my expressions. I'm just trying to think of like how a size of a football, like a football is not small. And like,
yeah, I tend to put on weight in my tummy area. So I'm like not someone who looks at my body all that much because my mom, was always really concerned with weight growing up. And so I like really rejected that. So I didn't even really notice that I was putting on all this weight. And I remember people would say like, you look like you're pregnant. And I would be like, whatever.
You're like, thanks.
I'm not. But it turns out I was just growing a cyst in my stomach.
Oh my gosh.
So my dad ended up flying out for spring break that year. And my friends at the time, I think, because none of us had really ever had something like this happen, they weren't all that good about checking in and showing up for me. So that was really isolating because all of them were on like spring break and I was getting surgery done. And then after surgery, I think because I was so sad about my breakup, I was so sad that college was ending. I just was really depressed. I stopped eating. I would have about a piece of toast a day. That's the most I could do. So my last month in college was miserable. I was not in a good place. But I had gotten into Purdue to do my PhD in counseling psych. So I was looking forward to that. And I just like sort of told myself like, okay, this will be a good new beginning and you will keep in touch with your friends. And for the most part, I have been able to, which has been really nice. But that summer when I went home, we were still trying to figure out this GI stuff, like, because I still had some symptoms remaining.
Okay.
And I, at one point, was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. But then I went to a second doctor who was like, I think you're just really stressed. Like,
oh, interesting.
Yeah. And he was like, let's work on your mental health. Like, give it some time. Do not start medication for Crohn's. And I'm so glad we went for a second opinion because now I have no symptoms and I take no medication. And it really has just been focusing on my diet and like focusing on my own stress levels. Like when I'm stressed, I will have diarrhea.
Oh,
without a doubt.
Me too. I a lot of what you're saying, I 100% relate to because I recently I went to GI because I was having problems and I had ended up having surgery because I had stones, but they're like stress can cause it. Eating like, a fattier meal can cause it. And it was just so easily triggered that my belly would get like this. I would literally look like I'm pregnant, but I wouldn't be able to move. I would have to lay down, and even laying down is pain. It's like, it's a whole thing. Anyways, but I completely understand. And yeah, stress, you don't know it until, like for the people that can figure it out way beforehand, it really can cause physical discomfort to happen.
Yeah. And I think that's primarily how it shows up for me is through my body. Like if I'm not doing well mentally, I won't be doing well physically either, whether it's headaches or nausea or just like upset tummy. But usually if something's really bad, I stop eating, which is not that great either. So that was the summer I was trying to figure out my medical stuff and then moving to Indiana and like starting a whole new life here.
What was that journey like? I guess going to now Purdue again, now you're making another move. What was that like?
I think it was less exciting than I wish it was. And some of it is like just not knowing what I need and like, what kind, because I think we're always growing as people. So I look back now and I'm like, oh, I could have done X, Y, Z, but I just didn't know I needed that at the time. The hardest part of it, I think, for me was I only knew the people in my program. So I started, our cohort was 5 people, and those were my friends. So I went to class with the same people. I hung out with the same people. My best friends were the same people. And that's just too much time with the same people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, when you're going to school with people, I'm not very competitive myself, but I think people in doctoral programs can be. So that would show up in our friendships then, is like competitiveness from class and academics and what's going on there. And that tension coming into like, because I lived with someone from my program too. And that tension was just like, oh, I don't really want to deal with this. But I wasn't doing anything to bring myself out of that either. I wasn't trying to expand my social circle. And then that 2016, fall, was when Donald Trump was elected. So that was also a big thing for me, because being in Indiana, I just was like, this is a different place. This is a red state. Vermont was so blue. Bernie Sanders was all the rage.
Yeah.
And now it's very different. Now I have students who say like really racist things in class, and there's not much I can do because it's their opinion. So that was a big transition. But I think the one thing that I was still doing okay with is academics. And in a lot of ways, theater really helped with that. Because when I was working on shows at Middlebury, sometimes I would have rehearsal from Monday through like Saturday, 4 hours a day, which leaves you very little time to do homework. Yeah. So I got really good at being very quick at it.
Nice.
Just like getting stuff out. So that has helped me to this day. And I also think now I'm more like, I don't care about turning in bad work.
I'm sure even your bad work is probably like so good.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I do think I'm a good writer, but I've gotten better at just being like, I need to cook today. I need to clean. I need to rest.
That balance.
So this paper is just going to get done in an hour. And it's not the best I've written, but it's going. Goodbye.
Yeah, no, for sure. And how was your health at this point? Because now you're post-op, but you're leaving. You went to Purdue. Now you're at Purdue. And so how did your, I guess, physical health with all your GI stuff end up?
It's taken a long time. I would say I was still having some symptoms on and off, because I wasn't as good as meal prepping yet. Like now I will eat most of my meals at home because I've gotten better at cooking and knowing what I like. And I do notice a huge difference if I'm eating out versus eating at home. Like my GI symptoms come back if I have like Subway or McDonald's, for example. Absolutely not. Cannot do that. Yeah. So they were doing okay for the most part, but then I had a different medical thing come up. So my second year in the program is when you start clinical training. So that's when you start getting assigned clients. You start doing therapy and all of that in our in-house training clinic. I remember the first day I show up to our orientation and I'm feeling this like sharp pain in my left leg. Very confusing. So I like asked my friend Haley, who was in my cohort, because she exercises a lot. I was like, Haley, like, why would I have pain in this area? And she was like, did you go on a run? And I was like, no, I mean, I barely walk, like nothing like that. And she was like, that's weird. Like, because that, she identified as like sciatic pain, or she was like, maybe you like, what is it called? Your disc broke, herniated. I don't know what the right word is. But that was her guess. And I was like, I don't know how this would be possible, but okay.
But it was in your leg, right?
Yeah, in my left leg. sort of starting in my groin region.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So then I went to the health center, and I think they were also very confused, but they were like, like it must be a disc thing. Here's some muscle relaxants. By Wednesday or Thursday of that week, I was in so much pain. It was like hard to walk, and I had a fever.
Oh, yeah. Not.
So that's when I called a friend and I was like, I think you should take me to the ER. Like, I don't know what else to do. And I went to the ER and they were like, okay, you've had stomach issues in the past, so we're going to just do some tests related to that. But I was like, no, but my pain's in my leg. And I think this is some of like people just not believing women's pain in medical places. But I was like, trust me, like it's not my stomach. I'm fine. And coincidentally, my friend Haley's mom was working. Here she is, Lily Cat.
Hi, Lily.
So she was like, oh, Aashna, I'm just going to do a scan in your leg. Like, I believe you that the pain is in your leg.
You're like, thank you.
So she did a scan, and that's when they found, I think at that time it was 12 inches, a 12-inch blood clot in my left leg.
Oh, my goodness.
And so they were like, okay, like, we're going to send you home. Here's just some blood thinners. And I also like was not really comprehending what was going on because I was in so much pain. And then my mom ended up flying to the US to come be with me because we had all of these doctor appointments, right? So like we went to Dr. One, who was like, you need to go to a blood specialist. So then the blood specialist was like, oh, you need to go to this surgeon. And then we went to that surgeon and he was like, okay, like we need to operate on you. Well, not operate, but they put like a tube up your knee to where the blood clot is and then like release some sort of chemical that helps the clot dissolve. So I was admitted to the hospital. And all of this while, I'm like trying to also figure out what's going on in school, right? Like, because it had been maybe a month at this point, and I really couldn't walk because the pain was so bad. And I had a teaching assistantship, so this is how like our tuition is subsidized, and I was supposed to be teaching 2 classes. And I remember my supervisor was just like this very unempathic person because she would email me every 2 days being like, when are you back? And I was like, lady, I can't walk. Like, I don't know.
Like, I just had a whole procedure with my blood clot. Can we not? Yeah.
Like, I just don't know.
Oh my gosh.
So I just decided I'm going to take the semester off because I can't keep up with telling people when I'm back, what's going on, all of that. But then that was a whole mess because then I had to pay tuition that semester.
Okay.
And like arrange for the money for that to be available. That was a whole thing while I'm like also in a lot of pain.
Yeah. And colleges aren't always the most understanding with like financial, differences or like, hey, I promise I'll get it to you. It's just like they have their deadlines. And I think that's kind of frustrating because yes, that's like, that can cause a lot of extra stress, extra fear, and also doesn't really help your relationship with students.
No. And then as an international student, I have to be in full-time status or I violate my visa.
Oh, right. There's that aspect.
And that's why I had to pay full tuition because I had to sign up for a full load of research credits. Like I couldn't even just take the semester off and not pay tuition because then I would like violate my visa status.
Right.
But I couldn't fly because I had a blood clot.
Yeah. Yeah. So you ended up doing just research classes?
My advisor is really nice. So I ended up doing really nothing, but she just put in research credits.
Yeah. Thank you, advisor.
Yes. But yeah, so the procedure, I was in the hospital for a couple of days. And I remember that was really not fun either because the first nurse I had just like did not believe my pain levels and did not give me enough pain medication. So I wasn't able to sleep. Like I would sleep for half an hour and then wake up and just be in pain till my next dose of pain medication. But then the second nurse was a lot nicer and was like, oh, we can just give you more. And I was like, thank you so much.
Right. That's so stressful. Yeah, I'm sure there's so many people that can relate to that, and just not being heard when you can, like I'm not a medical professional, but if I'm telling you something and telling you like I know what it is, it's probably because like I know myself.
Right. I'm not telling you to give me pain medication to take home. I'm literally in the hospital. There's a tube inside my knee. Like,
Yeah.
help. Um, but yeah, so that was not fun. And I also remember my mom it was hard for her to see me in pain. So she would be
Mm.
crying a lot. That, like, I just felt so bad. Um, but the clot never fully dissolved, but they had to stop at some point because, like, it gets too dangerous to continue thinning your blood.
Right.
So they stopped. And then the next couple of months, I just spent sort of like building back up my, muscles, starting to walk again because I'd been on bed rest for so long. Maybe you relate to that too. It's just like starting to move again. It feels weird.
Yeah. Yeah, trying to get up. It's almost like you can almost feel your muscles like almost like just bluntly like feeling weak,
Yes,
and I
exactly.
I remember sitting in actually I couldn't even really sit in my bed because my bed's really fluffy. So I was actually sitting on the couch right behind me.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on YouTube, you can see. And so I remember trying to get up, and honestly, my butt was just so sore, and I was like, I one feel lucky that I can get up, but like I feel so much for the people who have to be on bed rest for longer periods of time, because having to sit there is like mentally isn't always the best,
Mm-hmm.
like at first
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay, I'm getting the rest I need, but eventually life starts to catch up. And then on top of that, like physically, it actually physically hurts. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't realize that bed sores, I don't know if that's actually what they're called, but that's actually a real thing, and it's very painful.
Yes, it's
Very, very
not
painful.
fun.
Yeah.
But my mom stayed with me. I mean, I couldn't have done it without her because I,
Mhm.
still wasn't really capable of cooking or walking too much. It would be tiring to even take 2 laps around my apartment.
Mhm.
So it was incredible that she was able to stay and cook for me and just take care of me. And she stayed for about a month, and then my dad came to stay for a couple of weeks. So those, I mean, I really could not have done it without them. Um, but I think the hardest part of it was kind of like you're saying mentally, was just knowing I've added 1 whole year to my program because our clinical training works on a year-to-year basis. It doesn't work semester to semester.
Okay.
So I couldn't just get back into it in the spring. And that was really sad for me because I was like, oh, now people I started with are moving ahead of me. I'm going to have to start doing my training with some people I don't really know and that I don't have the same bonds with. Um, and just feeling behind.
It's like you start comparing yourself to where other people are at, and you kind of want to be there, and it's hard for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was hard. But, and I hate saying this, like adversity makes you stronger or whatever, but I do think all of this has helped me like get better at knowing what I need and like how to take care of myself. So going into my 3rd year, I just felt in a better place,
Mhm.
able to like manage things. I think this is when my symptoms started to get a lot better with GI stuff because I was just settling in. I felt more at home in Indiana because I had joined an activist org.
Hmm.
And I really enjoy doing activist type of work. Like direct action work is really where I think my heart is. And I found a lot of community through that and was finally able to make friends outside my program. So I was like, yes, I have people that I can talk to about other things, that I can relate to outside of academics.
Mhm.
So that was a good year.
Once you got to the other side of it where you started to feel better, like how was that in comparison to still not comparing yourself anymore to what other people are doing now that you are making other friends and that you can sort of relate to them on stuff outside of maybe just your major or what you're
Mm-hmm.
studying? I feel like that almost feels like so good.
Yes, it felt really good. And like my medical stuff hasn't gone away because my blood clot never dissolved. So I still have it. And what's actually pretty cool is one of my major veins in my left leg is fully blocked because there's a clot, but my body created its own little new veins to like
Whoa.
disperse the blood, which is
Oh,
why I don't have any pain or anything.
well, I was just about to ask, how is that with traveling or just with your everyday life? But isn't it incredible what the body can do? Your
Right?
body really
Yes.
created its own way. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I have to take blood thinners every day, so I
Okay.
haven't gotten off those, and that's why flying is okay. But the blood clot is also old enough that because the worry with blood clots is it might break off and travel to your heart or your
Right.
lungs, but mine is old enough that it wouldn't do that. So I just got to make sure I don't develop any new ones. And I'm getting a scan in January to see because I've reduced my blood thinner dose if we can like reduce it some more or not, but like it would be fine if I take it for the rest of my life, except if I want to get pregnant, which
Oh,
is
okay.
not on the cards anytime soon. I think ever, but who knows? Maybe when I'm older, I'm gonna want a kid. I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so that's just something I keep track of. Yeah, and then I think over time with graduate school, I've just gotten more confident in what I want to do and like the things I enjoy about it. I really like teaching. That's where I spend or put most of my efforts and energy. I clinical work this year has been harder because of COVID, and I talk to most of my clients on the phone, not even video, and it's just not the same.
Is that a preference thing or is that like their preference? Do you sort of ask them or how does that relationship work?
I just ask them their
Okay.
preference, but I'm working this every year. We do a different clinical site, and this year I'm with a community mental health agency. So a lot of the clients don't even have good internet access where they live because they're pretty
Okay.
rural and low income. So I usually just say at the beginning, like, would you like to do phone or video sessions? And all of them except one said phone. So that's what we do. And it's just not the same. Like sometimes
Mhm.
I can hear them like cooking in the background or like if they're home with their kiddos, sometimes the kiddo does something and then they have to attend to that. And
Right.
obviously that makes sense. I'm not going to be like, you need to be private, put your child away.
Right. Right.
That's not how it works. So it's just different.
I want to back up a little bit and just ask, so the blood clot, can you ever get it taken out or is that not an option anymore?
I could, it's just very risky.
Okay.
Because they have to like really cut into you and then get to the vein. And the doctor I'm working with now, his worry is that like if he goes in there surgically, what if he makes those veins that like my body created? What if they don't work as well?
Mm.
So he doesn't want to mess that up. And we might consider a stent at some point. But given the location of my blood clot, it's really hard to figure out where to put a stent. And then stents themselves can like be bad for you if those get clotted.
What exactly is a stent and what is its function?
These are very good questions, and I'm like very bad at all of this. Usually I like try to record the meeting so I can play it for someone else.
Yeah.
But my understanding is a stent is like a metal piece that you
Okay.
put inside a vein. And then when this metal is hot, it becomes bigger. So your blood is warm. So it like extends the vein and makes it bigger. So
Okay.
then blood would flow around the clot.
But they can't still take the clot out, then that doesn't sort of fix that
Mm-hmm.
issue.
Correct.
Interesting. Okay. That I had
But
no idea. So that's kind of really
yeah,
fascinating.
and then the stents can become like a site for blood to further clot. So there's a worry that if you put a stent in, it'll just create more clotting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, all of the way my doctor explained it to me, which I really appreciate, is like just think of your veins as plumbing, right? So you've got some bad pipes, but you've got some good pipes that are doing the work for you.
And how has that been moving forward now to this point of your life? You're just used to it or?
There are days that it really brings me down. I think I notice it when I have a doctor's appointment. The few days after, I just feel really sad. I
Mm.
think a lot of that is just feeling like I'm so young and I've had so many medical issues. Like, what if this is the rest of my life? Like,
Mhm.
what if just more of this keeps happening? Or I feel like envious of my friends who are my age and have never really had to go to the hospital ever. Um, but I think this has been the thing that I remind myself of always with any mental health stuff is like I just need to give it a few days. I'm gonna feel better. And so that is
Mhm.
what I just try to keep in mind is I know this won't last and I know this is coming up because I just had another doctor's appointment and so it's more fresh in my mind. And also like makes sense. I try to tell myself it makes sense that you're really sad about this. So I'm
Yeah.
not overreacting because my dad is the king of like emotional suppression and just being like, don't feel sad, just focus on the positive. And that does not work for me. But what works for me is saying, yes, this is shitty. It sucks that you had to deal with so
Mhm.
much, but hopefully there will be a better tomorrow. Or hopefully in a few days, I'll have another, maybe I'll have a good Zoom class or I'll have a good hangout with someone. And then that will be what takes over my brain space.
Definitely, especially in this time, those are very important to have that time to just keep yourself busy. And so now with your work in this past 2020 year of having to switch that, how has everything have to change? Had changed for you in terms of either how you work, your relationships with clients, or maybe as you for your own mental health or how you just do stuff?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question. Um, and I shared a little about this with you before, but my mom died by suicide in November of 2019, which was just 3 months, I guess, right before COVID hit. Um, but I was in the US when this happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I flew back for her funeral and I was in Mumbai for less than 23 hours and then flew back to the US because I had to finish client work. I had to finish the classes I was teaching, finish the classes I was taking, which I had a lot of flexibility for. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
luckily my professors are all psychologists. So they were
Yeah.
like, you're fine, take your time.
Right.
But then that December break, I went back home again. And at the time of her death, my parents were divorced.
Okay.
Um, so I had to do all of the business stuff. So I had to clean out her apartment. I had to go to banks and be like, hey, my mom's dead. Can you give me her bank account? And just all of this stuff that was so overwhelming as I was still trying to process that my mom is dead and there's mental health reasons and all of the
Mm-hmm.
guilt that comes along with that. Um, so I just wasn't a real human for those few months. And then COVID-19 hit the US and I was like, are you kidding me?
You're like
like
a
I
break, something. Yeah.
I and so in a lot of ways, I haven't even fully processed what COVID-19 has been for me because a lot of 2020 was still processing her death and being like,
Mm-hmm.
who am I now? And guilt was a huge part of it because I just felt so guilty that I didn't do more or,
Right.
XYZ, even though I know intellectually that there's nothing one person can do to save someone from suicide. That was still what was on my mind all of the time. And so everything I was doing was through this frame of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I upset a friend, I would immediately just be like, I'm a terrible person. What does this mean? I'm not showing up for someone else again. Or if a student was upset with me, which students are a lot, because who doesn't get upset with their professor?
Yes.
Uh, I would again go into this shame spiral of
Mm-hmm.
I'm such a bad person, I'm not good enough. And I was still stuck in my own grief. So I wasn't processing COVID-19 really as much. And then being so far away from my family too, while all of this is happening and I haven't been able to see them again since that trip where I just had to do all of this death related stuff. Yeah, so I guess it's a hard question to answer in some ways because a lot of my processing has just been around her death and what that has
Mm-hmm.
been for me. But at this point, like everything I do virtually, so that's a huge change from seeing clients in an office where you get to like watch their emotional experience to just hearing them breathe on the phone. um, Teaching has been such a huge change as well. Like I really thrive in the classroom environment. I'm good at getting them to like open up. We do a lot of icebreakers. And then last semester, most of my students didn't even come to class because the way Purdue made us do it is they wanted us to do it in person. I thought that was not something I wanted any student to feel like they had to do. So I would like allow them to come on Zoom or watch a recording, whatever they wanted. But what that meant is a lot of students just didn't do the work.
Yeah.
Which, now, which I'm okay with, because even if it helped one student feel a little more safe, I think that's worth it. So the teaching was just not the same, because so many of them I never interacted with. I could tell they weren't doing the readings or reading the assignment instructions because they were turning in bad work. And I felt so sad because I don't want to give you a bad grade. And anyone who reads my assignment instructions and does it gets 100. It's very easy to get a full score in my class as long as you are reading the instructions. They just did not do that.
Yeah, and it's hard to sort of, because then you start to think like you don't know what's going on in their lives. Maybe reading those instructions is just one too much step to do.
Exactly. And it made me really sad because I'm also flexible. Anytime a student reached out, even if it was the day an assignment was due, I gave them an extension. I really don't care. Just tell me what you need and I'll give it to you. But if you're not talking to me, then I don't know what you need.
Right.
If you're not talking to me and you haven't turned something in, that's a 0, because I don't know what else to do. And I didn't have the time to individually email every student and try and figure out what was going on in their lives. So I just hated that is how last semester went. I hated that students didn't do well in my class, but also it was like, I don't know what else I can do on my end. And I would remember that every time I was grading, I would feel bad, but then I would get to the students who read the instructions and I'd be like, okay, this isn't me. Like they know what to do. They're just not accessing that. But I think that helped me sort of like really fight my supervisor to teach on Zoom this semester. Because this way I can require attendance because it's on Zoom. So they're not being asked to do anything safety-wise. And I think this will be a better course because they're forced to come and I can like force them to listen to the assignment instructions.
You're like, there's 3 steps, just do that.
Yeah. And then my co-instructor and I, because she teaches the same course, just a different section, we deleted a bunch of assignments this semester. We're just like, we're going to just take away things. We're not going to change them. We're just taking them away. Make it easier for you and me. Because Indiana is not doing well with COVID. Like our numbers are rising. And I can't imagine emotionally what it's like for these students to, because I'm not feeling good about going into this semester and I'm fully virtual. Like I don't have to leave my house ever. So I can't imagine what it's like for them. We're trying what we can to just make everyone's life a little easier.
Coming into 2021, how do you think that that's going to change? Or is it still sort of in the same? You're just kind of in that like waiting to see what will happen?
I think maybe I can just be more honest with them. I don't know, like, and that's usually how I try to run my classes too, but just being real with them of like, I get that this is really hard, That's why we've really tried to pare down this class and I need you to engage. The class is about cross-cultural leadership, so we talk a lot about like privilege and marginalization and oppression and those kinds of topics. And I do think the one change I've seen is people are more motivated to learn because of the protests last summer.
I was going to say, do you think that having what's been going on in this past year and, continuing on, obviously this has not ended at all. Do you think that sort of can bring some like real life aspects to your classroom that have helped the students engage more?
I think so, because they all came into this class being like, my eyes have really opened because of the George Floyd murder and because of the protests this summer. So I'm like internally motivated to learn more about these topics now.
Right.
And hopefully, even what's been going on with the Capitol will be further motivation for them. My gosh, this cat.
We love animals on the podcast. So hi, Lily. So when you first started getting into what you wanted to do for a career or study it, how did that differ from what you thought it was going to be like now actually, getting closer to graduating and starting your practice?
It's a good question. I came into Purdue wanting to be a professor. And I think what's changed is that now I realize there's a lot of research that goes into being a professor. Like you gotta produce a lot of research, and then that's what gets you tenured. And that's not where my heart lies. Like, okay. I don't enjoy research. It's fine. What I don't like about it is that your research is only being presented to other researchers. You're publishing in a journal, and who reads that journal? Other academics. But like, how are we pushing out that research to impact the people who need it? And I have seen some academics get better at that. Like I've seen recently people are doing like tweets about their research, right? So they'll try and like summarize their research in a series of tweets. I follow someone who like summarizes her research on Instagram and will have like cute little graphics and stuff. So that's fun, but it's just not what energizes me. I don't like sitting alone writing. Mm-hmm. So right now is where I'm trying to figure out, can I teach without having to do the research part? Mm-hmm. And the answer is yes, you can. But that's where my visa stuff comes into play.
Okay.
To get a work visa and then eventually citizenship, tenure track jobs are really the way to do that, because they want you to prove that no other person, especially no other American, could replace you. And you can like do that much more easily if you're a tenured professor.
Okay.
Versus if you're just like an adjunct or assistant professor. So that's where I'm at now, is trying to figure out how can I teach at the college level without doing research? Or is there a way for me to teach at the college level and find a college that's more focused on teaching versus research? So I only have to do like a little bit to keep going and get tenured. But I also like clinical work, so I could see myself doing like just being a therapist at a college. And I think I would be fine with that. I just don't really want to work for people that much.
Yeah.
And I had a not so great experience at a college counseling center. And so I think there's some fear of going back into that setting. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to try and do my practicum next year at a college counseling center to like face that fear a little bit. And maybe I'll have a bad experience again, but then that will be good data for me to know.
There's your research. Yeah. Have you ever thought of publishing your research on your own, or is that not allowed?
I mean, you can. It just doesn't look as good on your CV, right? So they want you. It looks better if you have a publication in a peer-reviewed journal versus like, oh, here, I put it up on a blog, on my blog spot.
Yeah.
Academia is all about the bureaucracy, much like many professions.
And that's why I was wondering, because I was like, I feel like that would be so interesting to read. People who are actually working with individuals or, trying to maybe branch out into their own thing, not to have to stick to like the stigma or the status of like having to do it a certain way, but could also publish in their own way through their own eyes, their own experiences, and through the experiences of the people they come by.
Yeah, and I that's where like the people who are doing it on Twitter and Instagram, I think they're trying at least to bridge that gap. But usually that happens after you're published in a peer-reviewed journal is when I'll see them share their research in these other ways. Yeah.
If you could give advice to anyone going through, a similar journey, what would you sort of say to them?
I think figure out what gives you energy, like what do you want to work on versus the other things, right? So like that's how I found this love for teaching is I would find myself being like, I'm just going to make a PowerPoint instead of doing these other things that I'm supposed to be doing. Or I'm going to work on the syllabus a little more because that was a task I enjoyed. I think try and talk to other professionals who are in the roles that you see yourself in and ask them what they don't like about those roles. That can be really valuable information because most professors I talk to don't like the bureaucracy aspect of it, right? So like, that's good data to know that continues to be something that bothers them. And then figure out what are like your values and what is most important to you and what you're willing to give up.
Nice. It's interesting that you say that there are also other professors or people in that industry, I guess you could say, that also feel the same thing about the bureaucracy of it all, right? But yet that still is there. And I guess that's like the frustrating part. Now, I guess I want to ask you something that's sort of personal to me.
Yes.
Is that for a long time, I've known that I've wanted to go seek out somebody to talk to, a therapist, to sort of, just deal with stuff that I've been through and stuff like that. And one of the things I find so daunting is finding somebody. So I'm such a huge advocate for people talking to, who they feel comfortable to, or, finding professional help. But the thing is, it's like, I will, and this has happened more than once where I get on my computer, I'm like searching, I type in my insurance information, which I'm very privileged to have. And I realize that. And so I guess I kind of feel guilty that like, it's there, just like do it. Like, that's what my mind, the dark part of my mind saying, like you're doing yourself a disservice. Like, your mind just goes through all these things. And so how can like someone that may be going through a situation like me sort of work through that dauntingness? Because all I see are people's photos, a paragraph, and it's just like, it's too much. It's just like so daunting. And like, where can someone like that begin? And I guess myself.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. And I think one thing I'll say is there's bad therapists out there. And so I think that's also a hard part of it. My first two therapists I found here in Indiana were terrible. My first therapist, I was talking to him about racism, and he said, well, don't you think black on black crime is what you need to be worried about? And I was like, sir, what? And my second one, that's who I went to with my grief stuff, would talk about her own grief a lot, to the point where I was like, I'm not getting anything out of this. So I think part of finding a therapist is also being open to the fact that you might start with someone and not click.
Yeah.
And
it's like a relationship. And then
yes. And then that's okay to like tell them, this isn't working. But I guess starting with the photos and the bios, like you're saying, I would just call and like try and ask questions that are sort of related to your issue to get a sense of like, how do they even just talk about these things, right? So let's say maybe what I want to go to therapy for is grief. So I might call and be like, how do you work with someone that's grieving?
Okay, that would be really great. Yeah.
What do you think helps people to go through grief? So if I had asked someone that and they said, well, I think just really overcoming it is helpful, I would have thought, okay, that's not someone for me because I don't want to overcome my grief, so to speak. Calling and asking how much they've worked with clients like you. So you identify as Latinx, right? I'm not.
Yes.
Okay. But asking them, have you worked with Latinx clients before? What have been your struggles? And then even for you, thinking about, do you want to work with someone specifically who is Latinx or not? Some people want to work with people within their identity groups. Some people really don't. And then for you, there's an Instagram. I looked it up. It's called Latinx therapy. If you do want,
Ooh, writing that down.
if you do want a Latinx therapist, and they're like an Instagram page where they have Latinx therapists in their directory.
Oh my gosh, that actually helps out a lot because I didn't even think, like, I think about the things I know I want to talk about or like that I've processed, and I'm comfortable talking about them out loud, but I know that always talking to somebody else in that space would help. But I didn't even think about like it's there in my mind because I identify as Latinx and like of my childhood growing up and like everything I've been through is a huge part of it and my culture is. But at the same time, I never thought about, hey, maybe I should find someone who can help me also through that. So that's kind of really helpful. And thank you for saying that. Yeah, because it's just so daunting to sit on the computer and I'm like, oh, well, this person looks nice. And then it's like a paragraph. I'm like, it's just so much.
Yeah.
It's so much. I just had to leave my laptop. I'm like, you know what? Another time.
Yeah, I recommend calling because even in those like 10 minutes you speak, you can get a little bit of a sense of like, what would our banter be like? What kinds of questions are they asking? How am I feeling even in these few minutes that we've talked? And like you can interview them as well, right? So like you are picking them. Now, the other thing I always tell people is get on wait lists. So because most therapists will have a wait list and like maybe you can get on 4 and then you start seeing 1 and you're like, oh, it's not clicking. But guess what? I'm on another wait list. So I know I have somebody else that's going to follow up with me quick enough. So you're not just only doing 1 at a time because then that might take you months to finally see someone that you're connecting with.
Do therapists actually answer their own phones? I guess that was also part of the daunting process. I can't, just so many things. So I actually wondered, do they answer their own phones?
I would say if you're working with someone in private practice, more likely than not. And that's something also I look for. Like, I don't want to see a therapist who's at a big agency.
Yeah, exactly.
Because usually big agencies, like that's when things start becoming a business more. And then there's
like a number.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I really don't like that at all. And big agencies will also have more rules, right? Like if you miss 1 session, then like you got to pay a $40 fee. And if you miss 2 sessions, then we're going to terminate you as a client. And that can feel really cold. So I tend to like look for private practice type work. And then another thing is asking friends. So my current therapist, my friend recommended her to me.
Oh, okay.
She was like, I really like her and I trust my friend. So I was like, okay, then I'm open to this. And that's how I started working with her. So if you have friends in your area and seeing like, who are they working with? How do they like them? And then do they have openings?
Right. Oh, that's so helpful. Thank you so much. Who is someone that inspires you?
Oh, what a great question. Who inspires me? I guess I'll just talk about someone who's in this area. Her name is Vanessa Pacheco. She is someone I met through the activist org I organize with, but I've just never met someone who like cares so passionately about her community, and she's organized. And so like she does so much. She is like the leader of the food pantry on campus and will, talk about food insecurity all the time and how can you expect someone to be excelling at college if they don't have dinner to eat?
Yeah.
So that's one of her things. But then she's also like spearheaded our local legal defense fund and has been helping like Black youth, get lawyers and access to just better representation. And most recently, the case that the Greater Lafayette Defense Fund was working on, there was a kid who was going to be sentenced to like years in adult prison. He's 17. And they got him representation that got his sentence down to 1 year at a detention center. Wow. And just like, that is incredible. Truly.
That is, yeah.
And this is just some of the bigger stuff she does, but you'll also like her love for community shows up in every little thing she does. And I want to be like her and more like just doing work on this like local level, because I think sometimes when thinking about activism or change, like we can just get too macro focused. Like, okay, like how can I help Planned Parenthood, or how can I help Black Lives Matter? And I think what I've learned from her is like your neighbors need your help and you can start there.
Would you ever consider that as part of your career path?
I would love to. Yeah, I think activism will always be something I want to do. And I've even tried to like look at mental health orgs that are more activist sort of focused. And that's how I found this place called the Institute for the Development of the Human Arts. It's based out of New York, actually. And what I really like about their mission is they incorporate not just like people who are trained in clinical contexts, but people who are survivors of clinical mental stuff. So their workshops will be led by, for example, by therapists, but also by someone who's just been in a psych ward. And I really love that.
Where can everybody find you if there is a place for everyone to find you? Hi, Lily.
Yeah, I was thinking about this from your questions. I don't really have any socials that I plug, but I do want to like, I guess, build my skills as a consultant when it comes to like diversity kind of stuff, because I really enjoy doing that. So my email is my first name, Aashna, and then the letters B for ball, and then the letter A. So ashnaba@gmail.com. And I would love to try and be a diversity consultant with anyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing the work you're doing the work in your community. I can only imagine you're such a light, and anyone who gets to like be in that space with you and knowing your heart to like want to help is truly so valuable. So thank you so much for that.
You're so sweet.
And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time and energy. And yeah, I'm so happy we were able to do this.
Me too.
And with that, everyone, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.